Hey, everybody. We are right at the top of the hour, whichever hour you happen to be in. So I want to go ahead and get started with this to make sure that we have as much time as possible because we have so much great content to cover. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I am the events coordinator for Library Juice, which means that I get to help out with talks like this, which I really, really, really enjoy. And I'm very excited about today's talk on our new title that we published very recently. And I just want to quickly say a little bit about Library Juice in general, and then remind everybody that this is just part one of a two-part project. So we'll be back next week to hear from even more authors from this talk, and I'll drop the link to that in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. But Library Juice has a couple of different arms. Very briefly, Library Juice Press now allows us to publish books such as the title that we gathered to hear about today, as well as journals largely on the critical angles of library and information studies. So these tend to be practical guides as well as theoretical treatises on applying all the wonderful things that we do in LIS to social concerns that we're living through now. Library Juice Academy offers online professional development for all of us in the LIS ecosystem, so archivists, librarians, professional settings, as well as support staff. You can find more about us through that angle at libraryjuiceacademy.com. And then Library Juice Connections is what brings us all together today. And this is our events arm for both the other two, as well as all sorts of other webinars. So you can find out more about us at Library Juice Connections. We are on all the socials, all three of those accounts. Do take a look for us at all the places we like to waste time online. With that being said, let me just, by way of housekeeping, we are recording this session and it will be available on our YouTube channel soon after today. After we're done today, you'll all be receiving an email, both our panelists and our attendees, to make sure that you can find that. I encourage you to share it with your friends. We will be stopping the recording before the Q&A. In the hopes that we can speak a little bit more freely, knowing that we're not quite surveilled to the same extent. Yes. With that, let me step out of the way. I'm so excited to hear from all of our authors today. So Gina, let me change this over to you.
And I will actually pass it to Renée, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you so much. So I want to start today's session with our land acknowledgement. So if you just give me a moment to read this. We want to call attention to the original inhabitants of the lands on which we live and work and who have cared for it and the waters that sustain us. I know for many of us, we're coming from all across the United States and elsewhere. So we want to acknowledge all of these original inhabitants and caretakers. This text was imagined, edited, and compiled while on these unceded ancestral lands, which remain home to Indigenous peoples today. In particular, we would really like to recognize that settler colonialism is ongoing, and we acknowledge the reproductive brutalities it visits upon Indigenous women, girls, and trans, gender nonconforming, and two-spirit individuals in particular, as well as the generational impact of these trauma and violence on families and communities. To round this out, I would like to say that we recognize that these land acknowledgements can be performative without concrete action. And so we pledge as editors, and we hope you will join us in providing financial resources and community support to Indigenous-led organizations, particularly supporting reproductive justice, if you're able to do so. And I'm going to drop a few links of some organizations that we'd like to share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Renée. This is Alanna. I'm sorry my camera isn't working today, but I just wanted to give a little back how this project got started. So in the summer of 2018, Gina and I were at the Gender and Sexuality Studies in Information Studies Colloquium in Boston at Simmons College, and we had the honor of speaking on a panel with Carrie Wade and Shemaine Tucker, and the panel was entitled Reproductive Labor and Information Work. And this panel was really revolutionary in a way because it was one of the first times that folks who were actually in the information profession explored how our work intersects with reproductive expectations and how our experiences were shaped by our different social identities, including sexual orientation, gender, race, and all kinds of other things. It sparked a really wonderful discussion about how reproductive health information and LIS intersect in ways that sometimes we couldn't even imagine. So a few years later, Gina took the initiative to bring together a group of folks who were at that colloquium and other colleagues who were really interested in exploring this topic. And we continue to have discussions around new ideas within a shifting political landscape, and had a lot of fresh energy kind of brought to the topic. Over the year, we discussed different ways to imagine where we could take this project. We submitted various proposals to various publishers. The pandemic happened, life happened, and finally, we were left with Renée, myself, and Gina, with the incredible opportunity of landing at Library Juice Press with series editor Emily Drabinski. So it's been a long time in the making since we first started talking about this in 2021, and we've ended up with this incredible volume, which explores power, reproductive health, how that power is wielded and what it means, and how that power can also be a source of disruption and resistance. So thank you so much for being here, and I am going to turn it over to Gina.
Yeah, I would like to talk just a little bit more about sort of what's in the book. Today is just a sampling of the contents. And so the book overall consists of 20 chapters from 26 authors, which is such a great array of folks. That includes people working within libraries, but in information organizations, but also people out in their communities doing health work, information work, advocacy, and more. In all, the chapters insist that reproductive health is always about information, and that folks in LIS and beyond have a lot to say about it. We want to acknowledge the bravery of the authors who have written about these topics, because we know that for the editors as well, a lot of this is deeply personal. And during this political moment, we especially want to thank our 3 authors who were anonymous, who still chose to publish their experience for the benefit of readers without getting any of the credit that comes with authoring a chapter. We are thrilled that the collection includes chapters written by seasoned as well as emerging authors, and this is one example of how we really look to the tenets of reproductive justice as outlined by Sister Song to shape our editorial practice and process. We also made space for traditional research with a capital R, as well as work that takes a more creative approach in its exploration of information power and reproductive health. And we sought to ensure that each chapter was rooted in an intersectional understanding of these dynamics. Before I turn it back to Alanna to sort of talk about what today is going to look like, I also want to extend a huge thanks to everyone who contributed to this book in both big and small ways. That includes those authors who volunteered to participate in our internal review process. That also includes our many external peer reviewers, and those who are generous enough to engage in conversation with us as editors about how to best shepherd a book like this into existence during these political times. We, of course, as Alanna said, want to thank Library Juice Press and our series editor, Emily Drabinski, for all of their support and guidance. So, Alanna, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. So just kind of an outline of how we're going to do this today. We have amazing panelists, and unfortunately not as much time as we would like. So each panelist will get 4 minutes. The session will be recorded, as Sophie said, but not the question and answers, which will be at the end for about 10 minutes. I will keep time. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left in the chat. And I unfortunately will cut you off and give it back to Gina to move on to the next panelist if we are getting to that 4 minute mark. So I apologize in advance for having to do that, but we want to make sure we hear from each and every wonderful presenter here today. I'm going to hand it back to Gina now.
Sure. So presenters will be introducing themselves, but I will sort of move us along. So we will start off today with Latona.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Latona Giwa. I use she or they pronouns, and I wrote the chapter Liberating Our Labor, Cooperative Organizing Among Birth Workers and Beyond. And I'm really honored to be here. This is my first ever book chapter. So I wrote this chapter from my perspective as one of the co-founders of Birthmark Doula Collective, which is a birth justice perinatal service organization in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I highlight lessons learned from the process of organizing ourselves as a cooperative and the ongoing process of strengthening our commitments to birth and reproductive justice through our organizational structure over the course of 12 years, from 2011 to 2023, when I co-led the organization. My chapter explores how co-op organizing structures empowered us to shift power and information dynamics in the workplace. And I discuss how the structure of an organization, such as nonprofit, for-profit business, co-op, can limit or enhance that organization's ability to challenge inequitable access to power and information, either by replicating or dismantling structures of reproductive violence. And in the chapter, I shared that we found remarkable overlap between our work as doulas to afford clients with equitable power sharing and transparent access to information for their own self-determination and bodily autonomy in their reproductive health care, and how cooperative organizations empowered us as workers with an open exchange of information and shared ownership of all means of labor, including our own laboring bodies. So through cooperative organizing, we began to see ourselves, not just our birthing clients, as worthy of empowerment. And I situate this discussion in the context of, one, a growing Black birth worker-led birth justice movement in the United States, two, increasing demands on doulas in this post-Dobbs, post-Roe era, and an understanding that doulas are an essential and powerful sector within the field of sexual and reproductive health care. And I today would also argue that this conversation is urgently relevant in the context of growing attacks on reproductive health, and the resulting vulnerability of structures such as nonprofits as well as Black femme workers. And I say in the chapter that as birth and reproductive justice movements grow and evolve, now is a pivotal moment to shift power dynamics within our internal community amongst our workers and workplace structures in order to sustainably create change in the wider movement and to extend those effects outward into health and justice fields and into our communities as a whole. So this chapter provides a potential model for how reproductive health and justice workers can self-organize to truly embody the tenets of our movement, not just for our clients and communities, but also for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Latona. Next up will be Emily and Brenda.
Thank you so much. So my name is Dr. Emily Vardell, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my wife and co-author Brenda Linares, who uses she, her, aya pronouns. Our chapter is entitled Infertility Support Groups in Person Online, Beacons that Light the Path to Parenthood. And in our chapter, we use both our personal experience as a same-sex interracial couple, going through the infertility process, which for us was about 5 years long, as well as our experience becoming a part of a local in-person and virtual support group. And then finally, some research that we've been conducting about infertility information practices. So the research is a way of us making meaning from our experiences of going through infertility. So through our personal experiences and our research, we've been able to see the real key role that both power and access play in the infertility information practice experience. So there can be a real stigma associated with infertility and a lot of disempowerment that comes from needing help to achieve the goals that you have, which for many comes naturally. And obviously, if you're going through the infertility process, you need medical assistance in achieving your goals, which can feel very disempowering. And then there's the piece of access. So as someone goes through an infertility journey, as we write in our chapter, first you have to find a clinic that will accept you. And the infertility journey can often feel like you like a weird form of eugenics, in that you have to be smart enough, thin enough, rich enough to have a baby. And so we talk in our chapter about some of those barriers to accessing care, which can be clinics using BMI to screen out people that they want to treat, which is has faulty underlyings. And then also the immense amount of health literacy necessary in navigating the infertility treatment journey. So there's a lot that goes into figuring out all the acronyms associated with treatment, knowing what your options are. So a lot of people don't always start with going immediately to reproductive endocrinologists, which are the ones that do the artificial reproductive technology assistance. So they might start with an OB who may or may not put them in touch with the support that they need. And so there can be a lot of issues with, again, kind of knowing where to go on the journey. And then once you are part of the treatment, understanding how to manage all these pieces. There's a lot of information work, as explored by one of the co-editors, Gina Schlesselman-Tarango, a lot of information work in infertility. So the treatments themselves are very demanding, often requiring multiple shots where you have to draw up the medication yourself in very specific amounts and administer it at very specific times. And so there's a lot of health literacy issues that go along with that. And so what we found through our experience is that support groups can often support that need. So providing assistance with exploring potential options, strategies for navigating all of the myriad of treatments that you need to do. And then we're also seeing this, again, part of the support group, the importance of sharing your experience. And we're heartened to see that celebrities are coming out and sharing their infertility experiences, but they're often rich, white, straight women. So we hope by sharing our experiences and encouraging others to do that, we can explore the intersectionality of infertility and kind of lessen those burdens of power and access to provide information for a greater community. So thank you so much for this time, and we'll look forward to questions later.
Thanks, Emily. And I sent you a private message, but I love the Halloween outfit today.
Oh, thank you.
Mondo is up next.
Hello. Mando here. We they pronouns. I am a Black trans intersectional librarian, artist, and activist, and the founding librarian of the Library of Intersectionality. And I run my own diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility consultancy and independent research and information connection business. My chapter is Becoming a Queer Disabled Ancestor, and this chapter was originally inspired by the Black and Brown trans and queer house mothers in the ballroom scene, because they reminded me that parenting can look so many different ways. I was also inspired by the Combahee River Collective, as well as an organization in Sacramento named Love Liberated, which focuses on sexual liberation at the Black, Indigenous, queer, and trans POC in our local area. Something that came up to me in this chapter was thinking about the concept of the ongoing legal eugenics at the disabled community. Right now, we are currently in the middle of a ongoing pandemic, and pregnancy in children are directly impacted by that because they've discovered more studies in terms of how this is transmitted. And this would not be a thing right now if people had actually considered the care needs of the marginalized disabled communities. COVID is a reproductive issue. It is a reproductive justice issue, because if people are having to change their entire parenting journeys just to account for the fact that this pandemic is ongoing, maybe they're deciding to not have children at all. Maybe they're trying to figure out, for myself, I'm still trying to find a death or hearing doula who can sign and advocate for me in the hospital. But I'm how can I do that if we're not able to rely on our medical staff in the hospitals having mask requirements, And so in my chapter, I kind of delve into different aspects that should be addressed. For example, income and housing, financial stability, medical care, education, and addressing our unique information needs, because access is a reproductive justice issue. It's like so many people are not able to even get to the point of being a parent of any kind, simply because they are not able-bodied, because they are not cisgender, because they're not straight. Like, and for most people in the world, it's like the criteria to become a parent is that you are cisgendered, heterosexual, and you went out and you were able to make love without protection or without love. And you still are able to be blessed with a child. And that's not really something that is considered for people in the queer disabled communities. And so my book talk is kind of adjusting that from my own personal fired up lens, where I'm upset that this is not a unique and solitary experience to myself. Like, it shouldn't be an issue for people to have to justify why they are fit to parent when so many people are not fit to parent and yet have children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mondo. Next up, we have Jennifer. Is Jennifer here today?
I'm right here.
Oh, great.
No worries. Hello, my name is Jennifer Marino, and I'm a first-year psychiatry resident at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester. Today, I wanted to share my experience as part of a student-led movement to protect and expand reproductive health training and medical education following the Dobbs versus Jackson decision. The core message of my chapter is that abortion is not a fringe topic or a political statement. It's a fundamental component of healthcare education. And when abortion access is restricted, abortion training is restricted. And this affects not only future abortion providers, but every physician who will care for patients who can become pregnant. Without proper training, our patients suffer. And after Roe v. Wade was overturned, nearly half of OBGYN residency programs were suddenly located in states where abortion was banned or severely restricted. And even before Dobbs, fewer than 1/3 of medical schools offered formal abortion lectures, and clinical exposure was limited. So as training opportunities disappeared, so does the ability to provide safe, evidence-based care in the future. So at the time I was a medical student, my peers and I saw the consequences in real time, so we decided to take action. I was one of our school's leaders of Medical Students for Choice, where we led educational events and fundraisers to help support local abortion funds and teach students about abortion techniques. But after the Dobbs leak in May 2022, it became clear that education alone was not enough and we needed structural change. So we were recruited by an organization of graduate students who wanted to use collective action to try to instill change regarding health insurance, transgender rights, and abortion access and education for graduate students. As part of that movement, we formed a coalition to assess our institute's assets and gaps and basically try to fill those gaps by creating a petition calling for 4 major institutional actions. One was integrating abortion and family planning into our core curriculum for both medical and nursing students, issuing formal statements supporting reproductive justice and warning patients about the dangers of crisis pregnancy centers, improving access to reproductive health care on campus, including transparent health insurance costs, medication abortion availability, and financial support resources, and instituting formalized, mean-changing, and inclusive policies for non-gender conforming students. So to amplify this effort, we organized a rally on October 6, 2022, the same day as other Graduate Student Action Network members led their panels and rallies. And I was one of the speakers alongside many residents, faculty, advocacy organizations, and students. We shared very deeply personal stories, including my own experience that shaped my commitment to reproductive justice. And by the end of the event, we gathered over 100 signatures in support of our demands. So although we made many more demands, promises were made by our administration. And unfortunately, a lot of those promises did not follow through. So in order to continue some of our work and follow through, we established the Reproductive Justice Advocacy Group, which was full of physicians, nurse practitioners, and students who were all very passionate and provided abortion care. So our group's advocacy led to real, tangible results. So we were able to instill a new lecture on abortion, and that got grandfathered into our medical school curriculum. So although I went to a Massachusetts state school, we unfortunately didn't have any abortion care in our curriculum built in. We also made a session on teaching contraceptive and abortion counseling so students could practice with standardized patients, having some of these really difficult conversations that otherwise we did not get any training in. And although we were promised an institutional statement on the crisis pregnancy centers, we were blocked by our institution due to some litigious concerns. So we pivoted and published an op-ed to clarify the role of crisis pregnancy centers and explain where patients can instead receive safe, non-judgmental reproductive health care. And regarding some of the gender conforming policies, we were able to gather some students to kind of work on some of those as part of their capstone projects down the future. So the key message I want to leave you with is that although these big issues like abortion care can be quite harrowing for us, forming coalitions, being relentless, and using our collective voices can lead to real, tangible change. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next up is Emerson.
Hello, my name is Emerson Meinhardt. I use he, they pronouns. I co-authored the chapter from two trans perspectives with a trans feminine co-author who is not able to join us today. In this chapter, one thing I'd like to mention is, and acknowledge, is as a trans masculine person, I have stepped into privilege, and my co-author unfortunately stepped out of privilege, and so we would like to acknowledge that privilege shift. In this chapter, my co-author and I go over some issues for transgender folks in general, and specifically for reproductive health. This experience writing this chapter as a first-time author actually led me to pursue a second master's in gender, women, and sexuality studies at ASU with a focus on healthcare access for transgender people and reproductive healthcare access for all marginalized groups. I just wanted to share today some parts of our introduction. From the lack of training for our healthcare professionals in transgender care, the little research that has been done, and the misinformation pipeline, we've observed an insufficient level of understanding of the reproductive outcomes for transgender individuals. This misunderstanding leads to power structures tipped against these individuals, making care harder to access and reproductive rights and procedures more difficult to understand. We have found that research on transgender healthcare is slim. Most articles on transgender sexual and reproductive health focus on disease. Many use outdated derogatory language and use a psychomedicalization that created more of a medical pathologization of conditions in transgender health. We have also seen that the current political and social climate is being fueled by the misinformation pipeline that starts with social media and ends in legislation against transgender health care. This comes from Locke Miller's article from 2023. There are political actors using this process to demonize others, sway public opinion with false information, and limit access to care for many people through state legislation. What we see is an overwhelming picture that excludes the transgender voice, a dearth of genuine curiosity and conversation. As transgender people ourselves, we hoped to add our voices to this issue. We thought we would take a more bottom-up, personal approach to the topic and put forward a more individual and human experience. We'd like to note that our stories are just an example of immeasurable, innumerable possibilities for what it means to be transgender and access healthcare. We are both white Americans and do not hope to represent everyone, especially our BIPOC siblings. We are just hoping to start the conversation. So thank you all for being here and having us on.
Thanks so much, Emerson. Next up, we have Margaret and Jane and Ariel.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, our chapter was The Librarian's Role in Navigating Nuance, Collecting Diverse Perspectives of Reproductive Justice and Fostering Complex Conversations. And we are all librarians from the University of Florida Health Science Center Libraries. My name is Ariel Pomputius, and as a health sciences liaison librarian, I work with several different departments in the College of Medicine.
My name is Maggie Ansell, and I'm the Nursing and Consumer Health Librarian.
Hi, my name is Jane Morgan Daniel, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Health Literacy and Community Engagement Librarian. So our chapter is about how health library professionals are in the perfect position to highlight the voices of those who aren't normally heard in conversations about reproductive justice, using collection development, teaching, and community outreach. We use our experiences to talk about how librarians can improve the availability and accessibility of reproductive health information for underserved groups. We also use teaching and outreach to connect people to accessible, engaging, and trustworthy information, and give them a space to explore those resources.
We use the Association of College and Research Libraries Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, also known as the ACRL framework, as a way to analyze our activities and to demonstrate how they uphold the foundational principles of librarianship. I'll put the ACRL framework in the chat if you're interested in learning more.
So in terms of collection development, the ACRL framework's first frame reminds us that authority is constructed and contextual. That means that experts should recognize that unlikely voices can be authoritative depending on need. In the case of reproductive health information, the authorities of biomedical researchers and healthcare providers, patients with relevant lived experiences, and health practitioners and other cultural traditions are all valid. But the other frame that is particularly relevant to reproductive health collection development warns us that capitalism still exists, y'all. Information has value. As we all know, the healthcare and wellness industry is as profit-oriented as any other. So what was once a lovely and limited pool of carefully reviewed and approved monographs is now an absolute waterfall of internet resources, mixing both evidence-based and misinformation, particularly when it comes to reproductive health information. So we as librarians can help with that by collecting a list of trusted organizations, databases, repositories, and nonprofits that offer quality resources.
Because the community members the library serves understand resources through the lenses of their own experiences and values, librarians should ensure findability by tagging resources with appropriate metadata and encourage a broader understanding of an issue by shelving potentially conflicted accounts together under a unifying topic. It's the responsibility of the librarian to ensure that all patrons have access to materials that meet their needs. Readers' advisory and reference services can often serve as a stopgap to these challenges. In general, when selecting or creating consumer health information, it's important to reflect critically on the viewpoints presented, the positionality of the authors in terms of their identities, whether underserved groups are represented, and how disparities in outcomes are interpreted.
The ACRL framework provides guidance for librarians who want to provide instruction on reproductive health information through the frame called Searching as Strategic Exploration. This frame recognizes the value of serendipity and honoring the impact of the searcher's emotional and social context. We remind librarians to teach broad and flexible search techniques rather than rigid formulas for correct searching. We also encourage librarians to be flexible and inclusive in the sources that they present and to teach critical evaluation of sources. When it comes to issues of reproductive health and reproductive justice, librarians can really make a big difference by respecting the different lived experiences of communities who have been historically ignored or sidelined, supporting their unique information needs, and offering guidance on navigating health information. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shannon, you're up next.
Thank you, Gina. Hi, my name is Shannon Simpson, and my chapter is Radical Framing in the Ivory Tower to discuss myth versus fact on abortion in the U.S. And this chapter was inspired by quite a lot of things that were happening in my life at the same time, which was that I was doing a lot of DEI consulting. I was working with a community of practice that was grounded in the design justice principles, which I will share in the chat. I'm going to share some other things too. And really inspired by Sister Song and the students that I work with. So I'm an instruction librarian, and I felt like students, especially 2020, 2021, we're really craving like connection and to like what is happening in the world and us being able to actually talk about it in the classroom. So I teach a class called Sex, Drugs, and Guns. So I'm not afraid of talking and talking about controversial things, although I did just move from Ohio to California, and I hear what's happening in Ohio in terms of like what librarians, educators, everyone in higher ed is actually allowed to talk about and what they're being advised to talk about and what not to talk about. So, so my chapter is pretty much just a broad strokes kind of overview of a presentation that I gave, and it can be used and utilized to hopefully talk about other things as well. So I started with the University of Louisville's misinformation lexicon, and I had everyone in the audience, which was students and faculty members, kind of like use the lexicon to identify like some very general, normal kinds of pieces of information that were misinformation and then like categorize them. So it's like a very fun intellectual activity with non-controversial material. And then from there, we kind of started to dig into some of like reproductive health kinds of issues and eventually abortion and what kind of information is out there, and then categorizing it into like hoaxes, astroturfing, deepfake. Like how would you categorize these pieces of information or pieces of propaganda that are out there? And that was great. And then eventually like brought in the sister song tenets and the design justice tenets, and that's as a result of just very much wanting to take this kind of intellectual journey into a human journey, like, and reminding everyone that we're all people. And I'd like to see this emphasized throughout, you know, kind of like our experiences as educators, as people in this field. So I feel like we constantly are doing intellectualizing and kind of objectionable kind of evaluations, but I think it needs to be both and. So I'll just read the end of my chapter. It can feel daunting when given the opportunity to engage with controversial topics. However, pulling our academic colleagues into safe intellectual conversations can open the door for radical human-centered framing like design justice that moves marginalized communities to the center. Behind every single data point is a human story of yearning and loss and need and love. Let's bring those stories into the room. Let's remind each other whose lives are at stake and who are the very real individuals harmed by the proliferation of information based in money and power and agenda. We can liberate those stories, moving our ivory tower focus away from just scholarship and theory and turning to the real people dismissed and alone among us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And last but not least, we have Tanissa.
Thank you, Gina. Hello, my name is Tanissa King. My pronouns are she, her. The title of my chapter is Taking Control of Reproductive Health Information Behind the Scenes with a Cataloging Librarian. So I was a cataloging librarian at a large public research university in Texas when Roe v. Wade was overturned on June 24th, 2022. And I had an idea at that time for a project to enhance and improve subject access for our reproductive and sexual health resources, and also to expand the collection. As a cataloging librarian, I aim to facilitate and improve the research, discovery, and access of library materials. And in the face of losing these important rights in Texas, I thought that I could work from behind the scenes to help our university students, faculty, and staff. My chapter talks about this project, and here are a few highlights. So when I first began the project, I needed to create a list first with all the reproductive health resources in our library's collection. And so I used call numbers or classifications associated with these resources to do this. The Library of Congress classification is the system we usually use for organizing and shelving books by subject. And as I identified call numbers in our collection, I actually made the discovery that topics like sexuality, birth control, abortion, in vitro fertilization, etc., all fall underneath this Library of Congress hierarchy of the family, marriage, women. This is an outdated, antiquated, and closed-minded way to frame reproductive and sexual health topics. And I realized that making changes in these kinds of classifications can be extremely difficult and slow. So in my project at that time, I decided focusing on subject description would be the best approach. As I started identifying all the subject headings that could apply to these resources, I also wanted to consider ways to make subject access for reproductive health more inclusive. For example, if women's rights is a subject on a resource, other possibilities for subjects could include reproductive rights and human rights even. If women's health services is a topic used on a resource, we could also use reproductive health services as a subject heading. Abortion services could also be a topic that's more specific and be used if applicable. The Library of Congress subject headings are typically used in catalog records, but other vocabularies can also be used if they provide even fuller access to resources. Homosaurus is one option, which is an international linked data vocabulary of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer terms. And this was one that was helpful during this project. And finally, for the collection development portion, I wanted to expand our library's collection on reproductive sexual health topics. So I watched for resources like this and also resources that were more inclusive and cover topics that go beyond cisgender issues.
I include in my chapter a list of resources that I requested and that we added to the collection. And I continued and still do watch for these new resources as they are published. And some examples of titles I requested include Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty by Dorothy Roberts. And another was Reproductive Rights as Human Rights, Women of Color and the Fight for Reproductive Justice by Zakia Luna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Renee, were you going to facilitate the Q&A?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat if you feel comfortable, and we will go from there.